Chapter 7 Reckoning. The chaos Rayhan had orchestrated was no longer subtle. Financial markets had been shaken, intermediaries exposed, and public outrage reached a fever pitch. But chaos alone could not satisfy the demands of justice. The conspirators, those responsible for Rabu and Ayat's deaths, remained hidden in the shadows, confident that the storm would pass or that they could manipulate the aftermath. Rayhan knew that the final phase required direct confrontation, reckoning. The first step in reckoning was exposure. Rayhan systematically released irrefutable evidence of corruption, cover-ups, and complicity. Corporate records, government communications, and financial transactions, carefully curated and verified, were sent anonymously to investigative journalists, news outlets, and online platforms. The leaks were explosive, painting a vivid picture of calculated deceit and manipulation that had allowed the conspirators to act with impunity. Public trust in the institutions they had relied upon began to crumble. The conspirators' panic intensified. They had assumed the digital strikes and minor exposures were isolated incidents, but now the evidence was public, undeniable, and inescapable. Emergency meetings were called, lawyers engaged, and damage control strategies attempted, but the wave of revelations was relentless. Rayhan's orchestration was perfect. Each leak, each exposure, each disclosure was timed to maximize psychological pressure while ensuring that no single misstep could contain the tide. Rayhan's team continued to operate with precision. Surveillance footage, communications logs, and insider testimonies were compiled to create a comprehensive dossier on each conspirator. They mapped vulnerabilities, monitored behavior, and prepared contingencies for any attempts at counteraction. Unlike the initial phases of escalation, the reckoning demanded that every move produce irreversible consequences. There was no room for error. The conspirators' response would determine the effectiveness of the final outcome. As public awareness grew, societal pressure intensified. Citizens, enraged by the revelations, organized massive protests, online campaigns, and petitions demanding accountability. Political pressure mounted on elected officials, forcing them to respond to a crisis that had grown beyond the control of those at the center of the conspiracy. Social media amplified outrage, sharing leaks, discussions, and speculations at unprecedented speed. The nation had become a theater of exposure, and Rayhan was the invisible director orchestrating the narrative. The conspirators attempted to consolidate power and suppress exposure, but internal fractures prevented cohesive action. Allies turned against one another, mistrust spread, and defensive strategies failed to mitigate the impact of the revelations. Rayhan had engineered this environment. By manipulating both digital networks and human psychology, he ensured that fear, confusion, and betrayal would compound the chaos he had previously initiated. The reckoning was not just public, it was personal, structural, and inescapable. As pressure mounted, Rayhan executed targeted operations against key individuals responsible for the cover-up. These actions were precise and calculated, designed to neutralize threats, extract confessions, and amplify public visibility. While the specifics were executed in shadows, their effects were undeniable. Resignations, arrests, and sudden disappearances sent shockwaves through political and corporate networks. The conspirators realized too late that the storm could not be weathered. They were trapped in a network of exposure, fear, and accountability. The psychological impact on the conspirators was profound. Those who once wielded influence confidently was reduced to anxious, defensive figures. Decisions were reactive rather than strategic, communication was fraught with paranoia, and every action risked further exposure. Rayhan observed each response with meticulous attention, adjusting strategies to exploit errors and maximize impact. The reckoning was not merely punitive, it was a dismantling of power structures that had enabled corruption to thrive. Rayhan himself remained disciplined, focused, and unflinching. The memory of Rabu and Ayat guided every decision. Each step in the reckoning was a tribute to them, a continuation of the promise he had whispered in his grief: justice would be served. While others panicked, he maintained calm, orchestrating complex operations with clarity and foresight. His grief had evolved into a tool of precision, transforming personal loss into a force capable of reshaping institutions and societal perception. Financial consequences amplified the pressure. Market volatility, targeted disruptions, and exposure of fraudulent activities created economic uncertainty for conspirators and their networks. Investments were frozen, assets seized, and transactions scrutinized. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate conspirators, highlighting systemic weaknesses and corruption within broader institutions. Rayhan's reckoning was comprehensive. Justice demanded both exposure and consequences. By the culmination of this phase, the conspirators were publicly and privately destabilized. Their power, once unquestioned, had been stripped away by the combined forces of exposure, societal pressure, and strategic operations orchestrated by Rayhan. The nation had witnessed a collapse of trust, the unraveling of hidden networks, and the consequences of long-buried corruption. Rayhan's meticulous orchestration had transformed grief into accountability, and the reckoning was complete. the conspirators could no longer act with impunity. As the dust settled, Rayhan paused in his command center, staring at the glowing monitors displaying public reactions, news headlines, and financial data. The world had changed in a matter of months, driven by the unseen hand that had turned personal tragedy into national awakening. He had honored his family through relentless pursuit of truth, exposing deception, dismantling networks, and delivering consequences that would resonate far beyond the conspirators themselves. In the quiet aftermath, Rayhan reflected on the transformation. He had begun as a grieving father and husband, consumed by loss. Through knowledge, skill, and strategy, he had become a force capable of dismantling power structures and exacting justice. The reckoning had been brutal, thorough, and irreversible, but it was not the end. It was the culmination of years of grief transformed into power, patience, and strategic mastery. The conspirators had fallen, the public had witnessed their failures, and Rayhan, ever present yet unseen, prepared for the next stage, resolution. The chaos, exposure, and reckoning had reshaped the nation, but the final task remained, ensuring that the memory of Rabu and Ayat would endure and that the justice he had wrought would leave a lasting imprint. Chapter 8: Fallout. The nation was still reeling from the reckoning. Headlines screamed of corruption exposed, conspirators unmasked, and the fragility of institutions once thought untouchable. Rayhan's orchestration had achieved its goal. The conspirators were dismantled, their networks crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny and legal consequences. But the fallout was far from over. The chaos he had engineered rippled outward, touching every facet of society, economy, and governance. Financial markets struggled to stabilize. Stock exchanges experienced extreme volatility, with sudden drops and unexpected surges reflecting the uncertainty introduced by the exposure of hidden corruption. Banks faced scrutiny, credit flows slowed, and investors panicked. Rayhan observed these effects from his command center, noting that the disruption, though temporary, had profound consequences for those connected to the conspirators' networks. Economically, the exposure forced recalibration, restructuring, and accountability on a scale few anticipated. The social consequences were equally significant. Citizens, emboldened by the revelations, demanded reforms. Protests continued in major cities, fueled by outrage and a newfound awareness of systemic corruption. Social media amplified grievances, and ordinary individuals discovered power in numbers. Rayhan's actions had ignited civic engagement on a level that challenged entrenched authority. The public discourse shifted from passive observation to active demand for transparency, ethics, and justice. Government institutions struggled to contain the fallout. Ministers, administrators, and officials faced mounting pressure to resign or provide explanations. Policy reforms were announced, investigations launched, and oversight committees convened. The conspirators' previous influence now shattered could not prevent accountability, yet the speed and breadth of exposure created systemic instability. Decision-making slowed, communication lines fractured, and confidence in leadership eroded. Rayhan's calculated chaos had achieved far-reaching consequences beyond his personal vengeance. Rayhan's own life, hidden behind encrypted communications and fortified systems, remained largely untouched. He monitored every ripple, every headline, every movement of the now exposed conspirators. Yet he remained vigilant. While the majority had fallen, remnants of the network sought to survive, regroup, or retaliate. Every action he had taken was precise, but he knew that vigilance was necessary until systemic reform ensured that no resurgence could occur. The fallout, in many ways, required as much strategic oversight as the initial strikes. Among the general populace, fear mixed with empowerment. People realized that corruption and cover-ups could reach the highest levels, but they also discovered the potential for accountability. Rayhan's operations had shown that individual action, even unseen, could challenge